Hello, everyone in the Old Time Circus. Say hello to the chat, please. So we know you are here, really with us. This is a special edition of the show, édition spéciale. Bonjour, Ronusan. Bonjour again. Thanks for being here tonight again. I have with me Camille Moreddu. Camille Moreddu. She's a historian à l'université de Rennes, Rennes 2, en Bretagne. In Brittany, yes. Okay, Rennes is in Britain.
Yeah.
No question about it.
That's the capital.
Okay, yes.
Of Britain.
I know it's sometimes difficult with Nantes or that kind of cities.
Oh, you want to talk about that?
No,
I'm not the right person to talk about that.
But yes.
Nantes used to be the capital because the castle of the Duc de Bretagne are in Nantes. But now Nantes is part of another department.
La Loire.
La Loire-Atlantique.
Loire-Atlantique, okay. Mm-hmm. We won't talk about that kind of things tonight. What we are going to talk about is American folk music from the United States. And I will just introduce the subject now and talk about how the stream is going to happen in different parts. And I will talk a little bit about the book that Camille had written. So folk music, we'll talk about what's folk music in general, but in particular what could be folk music in the United States and how the discussion about what it could be in the United States around the 19th and 20th century, what was the discussion about that kind of things. I will cite a quotation about from Sidney Robertson. We'll talk in a minute about who was Sidney Robertson, but she's a huge part of Camille's book. She said, "I had for some times been worrying the question of folk song, like a dog with a bone. And particularly, I was curious about American folk songs. What was American about it?" So yeah, it's also about folk music, but it's also about American national identity, which was also big questions between 19th and 20th century. So maybe I'll ask you, for start, your book talk a lot about Sidney Robertson. Maybe you can tell us who she was, where she came from, where she lived, what kind of work she did. She did lots of different kind of works. Yeah. Maybe just.
So Sidney Robertson, she's better known for people who are interested in art music. They know her as the wife of a well-known composer, Henry Cowell, ultra-modernist composer. But she was also a folk music collector during the 1930s and later in the 50s. And she grew up in a kind of a progressive, very intellectual family in San Francisco. And she studied music and she traveled in Europe a lot. She spoke French. She spent actually a year in France, I think, when she was a teenager. And she developed an interest also in the social sciences. And that's how kind of her interest in music met with her interest in social sciences. And I love the quotation you choose because it's really the question she asked is kind of the question I followed in my book. Is like when you are asking what is American folk music, you're asking two things. What is folk? Who is the folk who represent who's American? And what is American? What type of music is American? And who are the people who play this music, basically? So, and all her life she was wondering about this issue, and it started when she was working as a music teacher in in several schools, and especially progressive educational schools, and notably one in New York, which was part of what was called a settlement school. I don't know if you are familiar with that.
We'll talk about the settlement school a little bit later, about work in that kind of schools, what it represents. It's something that's to do with the New Deal a lot, and that part of American history.
It started before actually, but it was. She was teaching music at for students who were. Some of them were immigrants who arrived recently in the U.S., people of Jewish origin, and she was. She was very surprised when she realized that those people were very into the song "Home on the Range," which is a cowboy song, and they loved it. And even the she called them the Big Jew, Mama Jew, or they were singing this song, and so she thought, what is going on here? And so really her work was about figuring out why songs like "Home on the Range" had
were so popular.
Had a power to, comment on dit?
To be adopted by newcomers and
to put people together
okay,
this communal
community
spirit and stuff. So that's how one of the reasons why she started to collect folk music.
Yes, we'll talk also a little about that a little bit later.
Ouais.
There's different approach to collect music and to study folk music is like much more of an historical antiquarian approach, where it's to collect music from maybe to collect the older source, the better, and to collect in a purely intellectual literacy interest.
Ouais.
And she was more of someone interested in the social role of the music and what music could accomplish, and also the people who were singing it and the people who were playing it. Not only the text and not only the pure form of the songs or the ballads. Yeah.
Ouais.
Est-ce que vous suivez les spectateurs? Est-ce qu'il y a des francophones dans le chat qui veulent dire bonjour? S'il y a des gens qui veulent poser des questions, questions are welcome. Don't hesitate to ask your question about what we are talking. So folk music, maybe you have some idea of what folk music is. Don't hesitate to type. What do you think folk music is? Type now. you have 5 minutes. And we'll talk about the later. We'll talk about all the different inventors of the folk music, the people who get to decide what American folk music is. We'll talk about collectors, about music labels, about the record industry, and also the politics about it, the deciders. We'll see that Franklin Roosevelt and his wife had a huge part in this, and also classical composer. We'll see that some classical composers actually, someone proposed something.
Folk music with proper aging. I love that. That's cool.
That's cool.
Come on in and talk.
You're in the right stream right now. But before that, let's finish on the biography of Sidney Robertson.
Ouais. Sorry.
No.
I got carried on.
Don't worry. So she was. She grew up in San Francisco.
Yeah, in wealthy. His father made a fortune by selling a sewing machine.
Yes.
Singère.
And before that, he was playing.
Billard. Yeah, that's what he was a teenager.
Snooker.
Snooker. Oui, billard.
No, billard. I don't know.
Billard.
On bars and saloons of the time, and
he was gambling. He was a gambler because he didn't want to work in the train factories.
He was building rail tracks.
The rails, and it was too much of a hard job for him. So instead, he went to saloon and was he was gambling. He made a lot of money and came back home, and his parents were actually quite proud of him because he made a lot of money. But that was Sidney's father. And her mother, she grew up in Louisiana. Some of her family came from France. And she traveled a lot. And when she was young, she followed her uncle, who was a former soldier for the Union side during the Civil War. And she accompanied him while he was doing a campaign for vaccination with in some Native Americans reservations, and she was the cobaye because they were.
Yeah, I read that she was a guinea pig for because
the guinea pig for
people was scared of the campaign rightfully because some of them were
they distrust
the American government
and so she got a shot every time she went in a different reservation.
To show them, it's you can do it, but then she get vaccinated multiple times every time she got a new shot.
And she was still alive later, so she was fine, I guess. Maybe those were not very efficient vaccines, but I don't know. But that was when she was young, and then she was really engaged in social activism. She opened a milk bank in San Francisco. And she was active in different type of associations, and she also was quite the intellectual. One of her friends was Gertrude Stein, the writer. So, in a nutshell, Sidney Robertson, well, at that time Sidney Hawkins, she grew up in a very well-off family and quite progressive, open-minded, and intellectual type of family. And
at the time her parents were kind of wealthy and rich, but they at some point they
lost everything during the Depression, and before that they got a divorce, and they lost everything. So that was while she was in Europe for a honeymoon. She married a guy who was a medicine student in Stanford. While she was studying there, she was actually one of the rare women who were. They had a quota of women, quite narrow, and she got in. But she was studying Romance languages and stuff that she didn't care a lot about. But anyway, so they traveled to Europe. Not to sightsee or do tourism, but to go to psychiatric seminar in Paris, and then follow the international seminar of psychanalyst Carl Jung in Zurich, and that's where she met some very important anthropologists and psychologist, and where she really got into social sciences, and that's really something that will be very important in her approach to music. As you said, how she's very interested in how people do music, how they do it, and thinking about music as something alive and not a dead bone from ancient past that you have to salvage from disappearing. And so that was her big how she didn't think like an antiquarian, was looking for remnants of the past, but more as an anthropologist who wanted to study what people were doing now and here.
Yes, maybe I'll show you a picture of her. Wait a minute for the picture. That's her. And the other woman on this picture is
Maud Karpeles.
Maud Karpeles. So Sidney is on the left, right? No.
On my side.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the left side for you, and Maud Karpeles is on the right side. They both work together, but this is later pictures.
Yeah, in the
she's
50s,
already kind of old.
They just did one field recording trip together, following the tracks of
Cécile Sharp.
Yeah, they tried to find people that Cécile Sharp and Maud Karpeles recorded in the 1910s, and so they re-recorded the same people but they didn't get along quite well together. But
Oh.
I have actually one of Sidney Robertson's specialists, Callie Kirst. She was a folk life specialist at the Library of Congress. That's where I met her, and she actually taught me a lot about Sidney Robertson. And she's currently working on an article about this field recording trip with Maud Kerplis and Sidney Robertson, and she's trying with a colleague, a British colleague. They are trying to see why they didn't get along together.
We don't know yet why they didn't get.
Yes, we have clue, but you have to read the article.
Okay. Some things about her is also that she seemed from your book to have a really strong character, to be a strong-headed woman. She seemed really.
En français, on dirait que c'était une peau de bique, mais je sais pas comment le traduire en anglais.
I had a question about that. How do you like her character? Do you feel close? Do you like her as a person after
Sidney
working
Robertson?
on her? Yeah, Sidney Robertson. How do you feel about her?
That was one
person?
of my issues. That it's like I like her very much. But I tried to stay not objective because that's not possible. But I tried to keep some nuance.
Yes.
Like in the field of when all the people who are studying or talking about folk music collector, they tend to present them as the hero. Like Alan Lomax, she's the first guy, the very I don't choose him by hazard.
By accident.
By accident, thank you. And so what I tried to do is actually to replace her work and what was innovative about it in the context, general intellectual and musical context, not exceptionalize her.
Yes,
I don't know if that
and
makes sense.
not put her on a pedestal
Ouais.
some of the other male collectors were, like Alan Lomax, John Lomax, Cecil Sharp.
Yeah, and her too. Sometimes people write about her, and she's like, the pioneer. And
she wouldn't like that. She wouldn't accept to be put like an exceptional person.
I don't think so.
That's
because
not how she worked.
She loved to talk about others actually, and that's why I choose her as the main. One of the reasons I choose her as the main character of my thesis, because it was very convenient to follow her work, her career, and from that, actually, you have to talk about a lot of other persons and movements and
all the other, because everything in the book is around her. We see that she worked with a composer. She married one. She worked with lots of collectors. She worked with the government, with the U.S. government. She worked. I don't think she had much to do with labels. She didn't work in the music industry.
Later. She published with Folkways and.
Oh yes. She published 3 records in Folkways. Yes.
That's actually the single chapters I had to take aside at that, because she wasn't. Not that I can think of.
Someone mentioned Bela Bartok.
Yeah.
He helped gather and catalog Turkish folk music. Exactly.
Yeah, of course.
And we'll talk a lot. I don't know. You talk about Bela Bartok in your books at some point. I don't remember that.
Yeah, maybe I know that actually. Yeah, I talk about him because he was very influential to Henry Cowell's work. Was the husband of Sidney Robertson, and he was kind of one of the first guy in the US to talk ethnomusicological course and to present to his students world music. And he traveled and he met Bela Bartok actually and got on the field work with him. And so he was very influential. So mention him.
That's maybe a good transition now to talk about composers.
Yeah.
Classical composers, because yes, for me it was a bit weird when I first read your book. Then at the very beginning it talks a lot about classical music composers, and I was because it's a book about folk music, but it helped me understand that of course most of what we called folk music was not labeled like that, was not labeled at all, and some of the first people to start putting label on it and start wondering what is folk music, and started gathering folk music to put it in their own composition, was classical music composers.
Yeah.
And most of them get to decide what was good folk music, not good for what they could put in their as their influence, and for some. And we'll talk. Maybe we'll start talking about the one in particular. What's Anton Dvorak? Dvorak. Thank you.
I think so.
I think so. Who played apparently? I didn't know that. Who played a huge part in the U.S. about defining what could be American folk music, because he published a paper. Maybe you can talk about that paper that started a big controversy in the US about it has to do with this composition called Symphony of the New World. And at that time he published some paper about what was the issue back then.
Yeah, so he was working at the New York Conservatory. He was invited there because he was quite successful at that time. And so he was one of the first European composers who imported in the US one of a movement, the like romantic movement. One of its foundation was the idea that to create a national art music, one of the way you can achieve that is to use the people's music, because what is a nation? It's a people. And so if you use people's music in your composition, but you have to elevate it, because there is also kind of a paternalistic
approach
dimension.
Yeah.
But so that's an idea that comes from Europe, actually, as well as the very concept of folklore, Volkslied. It comes from a German philosopher. And so actually the book is really about how, not as much as about folk music in itself, but about how people tried to define it, what were the debates, and how defining American folk music was also trying to define what is the nation, the culture of the nation. Anyway, and so Dvorak was in New York, and he had some African American students, and one of them sung to him a spiritual, and I have to be careful, and so he came up with this idea that really took from his Czech
music
uprising, but that was something he was trying to do in Czech, create a national music that was different from the main current of German music.
Yes.
When you're a nation, you want to have your own culture, your own music, like you have your own flag. So basically, so Dvorak arrived in the US, and he wrote in a paper, "Okay, guys, I know what you gotta do. You got to use African American." He didn't use this word, music, to create a national culture. But what he didn't understand at that time, is that it was right in the middle of the institutionalization of segregation, and that for all the big fart from Boston and all the art musicians from Boston, saying that was like unacceptable, was like, what? And so and so there were a lot of reactions, and some people thought, oh, that's a good idea, yeah, he's right. And among them was Crébiel, who was a guy who collected African American music, so he was really into that, and he thought, yeah, that's a great idea. But others were like, what? But they are not American at all. They are Africans, or their music is just a bad imitation of our music, us white. Especially the debates were about religious music. So. And so, yeah, it creates huge debates, pro and cons, and that's something that where in the 30s people were still talking about that. And what is the place of basically people who were first enslaved, then segregated, who came in America by force. And so that's very complicated to... it was, for a long time, very complicated to find a place for them within the American...
And to be accepted as citizen and...
Yeah, and in the cultural fabric of the nation. Yes. Like, you can't say that African-American music is not American. That's a total nonsense. But how you manage... Because the idea of folk is that there is a people, a land, and a music, and that it's very ancient and very deep into the soil, you know, the roots and stuff. So what you do with that? And so...
yeah, there's this idea in your book that come quite often. It's coming from the 19th century in Europe, where the folk music was. There's the music of the folk, and there's the music, the folk, and the land. Mm-hmm. Everything is just very simply connected, and for them back then, no? It's
a generalization, but what you get to understand is like there were all those ideas of that were very pregnant in the Romantic movement, intellectual and artistic. It was a reaction to the Lumière and the birth of the nations. Yes. So in context of empires where people were wanted, also it's the century of revolutions, of people wanted to have their own flag, their own rules, and be their own, don't be their own under an empire, and so it's translated into the culture, and so really the cultural definition of the nation was very important. And so those ideas that it seems simple, it's always a bit more complicated than that, but the idea was like the people from Czechoslovakia, they are not German, they have their own music. And so the philosopher who invented actually the term Volkslied, folk song, was Johann Gottfried Herder, and he was a guy who was really against the idea of les Lumières. Je sais pas comment on traduit ça, les Lumières.
I think c'est les Lumières.
Les Lumières, and this very elitist notion of culture with a big C, like culture is the Roman and the Greek, and it's Paris, and the rest is just not very important. Or and it's also the sentiment and the feeling instead of the rationality, and so that's where it comes from. And then the question in the book, it's how can it work? Such a concept can work in the case of a country like the US, where made of people who came from elsewhere, except for the Native Americans. But that also caused a lot of debates, especially with the composer at the end of the 19th century. What can we do with the...
Because some other composers said, yes, we should inspire our music with the folk music, but the folk from the United States is not the Black Americans, it's the Native Americans. Yeah,
for some people that was
some composers started making song with the same level of knowledge than Dvorak had from the Black American music. Some people that didn't really know, because we still don't know much about, I think, Native American music.
Oh, there's been a lot of studies.
There's been a lot of studies since then.
And actually those composers, they weren't stupid. I mean, this guy, Arthur Farwell, who was someone, he was really interested in Dvorak's idea. But he was, for him, it was the Native Americans' music that was the foundation on which you can build art music, a national art music. And he was working with anthropologists, notably the recordings of Frances Densmore. I don't know if I pronounce it right, but so, and he was trying to be really, unlike other composers, to pay attention to the way the music of, so it was in the region of the plain, mostly, how their music sounded different from Occidental classical studied music with other type of notes, and so he tried to stay faithful to that. I don't know if that's the right term, but anyway, so he tried, but still, it didn't say Native American is American folk music or is American music. to become American, it has to pass through the knowledge and the art of a real composer taught at conservatory and stuff. So it's still, you still have a paternalistic twin.
Yes. Yes, there's another question from Ronusan. Does the US shorter history than Europe, Asia, Africa mean that it should have a different definition of folk music than others?
No, because everybody came from elsewhere. I mean, if you look at the European history, it's also people who came from East. So it's always the same. It's
the same history.
If you're trying to find the root, the very end, you'll always be. I have to face the problem of what you do with the people who arrived after or who are not native, in the sense of like immigrants. What will you do? Their music is... So that's the problem when you try to define anything or any art, when you try to give it a national... because also a nation, it's very big, so music from North Carolina isn't the same as music in Texas or the same in music in California, to stay in the US example. So that's always problematic. But I don't have personally an opinion on that. I'm just trying to find out how people were dealing with those questions and how they try to find answers, and how those answers often reflected also their ideologies and opinion, like this composer who were really against the idea of using African American music. He was also a big segregationist who voted a law against mixed marriage. So you can always find that ideologies are also an important part when you try to... So that just raises issues of how you... Anyway.
I was about to give you some more beer.
Are you sure that's a good idea?
Yes.
Thanks.
And also, just slipped. I was thinking about just what you just said. Yes, I was thinking maybe to help to be to continue on that question. Maybe what I get from your book is that folk music is not really different in the US than in the Europe, but the fact that it has to be defined in that particular country helped us to get a better idea of how folk music is created, and help us maybe to get a much more modern idea of folk music that could be also applied to European music. Like the way in the US they had to deal with the fact that there were so many people, so many different kind of immigrants. Like maybe in Europe there was lots of migrations also in Europe throughout all the centuries, but we tend to see to overlook that question, while in the US they needed to deal with that, and maybe they came up.
The problem was also happened in other countries. It's just happened that I worked on the American my field is the US, but in France you have the problem of regions. And what you do with the Britain people who don't speak French, and what is their music? Is it French? Is it like a national? Does it represent the national culture, or just a exotic regional one in the periphery of the center? And what you do with Corse music? Is it still French if it's in an island? I mean, that's in Turkey. I imagine there are also a lot. There are also a lot of debates about those issues. Really, it's not specific to the US. In Canada, there is also the big problem of when you're in a country with they call it autochtone, but Native Americans, Métis, who are mixed, a specific nation with French, Scottish, and Native. Canadian ancestries, Francophone, Anglophone. What is Canadian folk music? So that's just
that's not specific to
the idea is just to think about to see how people they try to find an answer to that. And I personally really like how Sydney Robertson and several of her colleagues how they came up with an answer that I really think is a good one. in the sense of it's very inclusive, but then again, it's how you define a genre. It's not to say that there is no typical traits, musical traits, American musical trait. It's really how intellectually you define a musical genre. Wouldn't say there's no. I'm the first one when I hear something to say, oh wow, that sounds so American. That's great. I love this Scotch snap mixed with nya nya nya. But here it's really about intellectual and also political, of course, definition of the nation through the music of the people. I don't know if it's strong.
Yeah, it's Orval beer.
Orval.
Orval. Before talking about another point, we'll end with the last thing Runesson said. I think the U.S. many of the migrations happened within documented or living memory, so the music of diaspora communities don't as often get added American prefix to their catalog.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and this documentation was made, among others, by Sidney Robertson. She documented lots of new migrations in the 19th century, in the 20th century.
Yeah. And her idea was that as long as it's recorded in the US, in the street or in a bar or in a restaurant in the US, why
US
isn't
music.
it American? But that's, with some, of course, it's always more complicated than that, but...
Okay. Before we'll do a short break in maybe 20 minutes, or 15 minutes. But before the break, we talked about some of the. Well, we didn't talk about everything, but let's move on the composers. Another huge part of the people who had defined what was folk music were the collectors. Some other people who were not, some of them were, but most of them were not musicians themselves. They were like more people who would travel and collect mostly songs, ballads, and sometimes also music, instrumental music. I'm just maybe some of the most well known. Okay, yes. Oh, there's this command you can use. And you'll have all the info on Camille Moreddu's book.
I guess. Wow. Class.
And yes, the collectors. Some of them are. Some of the well-known collectors that spoke English are British, like maybe Francis Child, who collected lots of. Ballads.
It was American.
It was American.
Yeah.
Also, okay.
But he studied in English, and he really had he was really influenced by the British School of Folklore studies.
Okay.
So that's why.
Okay, I thought he was.
English. He was a big specialist of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
So, and he was an English literature teacher. So.
Okay. And later Cecil Sharp, who was British?
Yeah, he was British. Definitely.
British, yeah. They collected lots of ballads and especially and sometimes in the work in the US was Cecil Sharp was mostly on the Appalachians region.
Yeah, the southeast.
Southeast of the US.
Southeast Appalachians.
Yes. Southeast Appalachians. Yes. Which was kind of in your book you talk about the old frontier was the Appalachians mountains, and the new frontier a little like 30 years later is the west, the western the far west. Yes. And we'll talk then about John Lomax, for example, which was one of the and Charles Lummis. But let's talk about maybe the collectors that worked in the Appalachians region. Sidney Robertson get to work with Cecil Sharp at some point? Or
no,
not directly.
No, because he was in the US in the 1910s, and she was a child at that time. And she started collecting, working as a collector in the mid-30s.
Okay.
But she read a lot, and she was really inspired by his approach.
And she worked with the woman we saw
and she worked
earlier,
with Maud Carplis.
Maud Carplis
was Sharp's colleague.
Okay. And there's this. What was different in their approach to collecting folk music? Cecil Sharp and also maybe Child Middle. Let's talk about more Cecil Sharp and Robertson. How did they differ in the way they would collect song and choose the song they would collect?
Okay. Well, Cecil Sharp, he has a goal when he came to the US. It was to find remnants of old Britannic songs, old Elizabethan ballads. So he was a musician, very interesting guy. And so, but when he came to the US, he was his interest was on what was left of the English folk traditions. So he went directly to the Appalachia, where regarded as the place where people quite like stayed the same from the time they arrived in the 18th century, which is actually obviously not really totally true, but still they were still singing old British ballads like Barbara Allen and songs about knives and stuff. So he collected that, and so his approach was really to that. So he just focused on English language songs, not really into instrumental music. Like he couldn't care less about banjo and fiddle.
And fiddles.
For him, it was not very interesting. Didn't like religious music neither. And what was emerging as hillbilly music, what would be recorded by the labels, for him it was trash music. But still he has been like demonized. That you can say that. Like he has been demonized by some researcher who talk about him with 21st century's eyes, saying he was a racist and he didn't care about African American musicians from the Appalachia, and he was blah blah blah. And I don't think that was the case. I think just was a guy from the early 20th century. So sometimes also it's easy sometimes to criticize people who did work, but it was like a long time ago and with other mindsets and stuff. So, but to answer your question, sorry,
no.
Robertson was really impressed by his work because he was a musician. So unlike guys like Child who were only interested in the text,
words, the lyrics,
the words, because they were literary researchers, so they were interested in the words. He was also interested in the music, and he was one of the first in the Anglo-American repertoire, because there were also the anthropologists who were recording Indian music, and they were interested in the music as well. But anyway, but
he didn't use recording devices, but he was able to use kind of good notations of, well, the most.
He did his best.
He did his best. And he was able to do it, which was good, because some of them wouldn't even care to note the melody of the songs. No, and but mainly the big difference. There are two big differences that Robertson didn't. She wasn't looking for, or at least not only for old stuff from ancient time. She was also very interested in contemporary folk music, like work songs and protest songs. And also she didn't only recorded Anglo language. English
language songs. She also recorded Turkish music and Armenian music and Portuguese and...
Yeah. And also, there was this, for those first collectors, there was this idea that maybe the best version of the song is the oldest one. You need to get to the purest form of the oldest That's what they were looking for, actually, maybe.
That's what means antiquarian. They were looking for the oldest
the
one.
oldest version of the song.
And that comes along with in terms of cultural paradigms. It's equal to evolutionism. Evolutionism. So it's like they were not necessarily reactionary guys or conservative guys, but that was how they were thinking, their intellectual baggage, or I don't know. It was to find out what was the older version, and to sometimes try to retrace and to find, and also, so the idea was that the oldest one was the authentic one, and the other one, they were not as authentic, so they weren't as good. And then people came out with the idea of maybe there are other versions that can be also interesting, even though they are not as old, because you can find that there was this researcher, and I forgot her name. She was from Nebraska University. And she was one of the first actually to study cowboy songs in Nebraska, and her idea was to study how old English songs from Great Britain were Americanized, and so for example, the name of cities were changed in the lyrics. Instead of, it's a wrong example, but instead of speaking about London, they were speaking about, je sais pas moi, Boston. But, and so it's an evolution of the problematics in research. How, and I forgot the origin of the question. But
no, that's okay. Yes, and Ronison add something that's interesting. We still have that debate in my band. Do we try and match the oldest recording we can find, or how is it now most typically played or expected? That's something also in old. We'll talk because Camille is also playing banjo and old time music, and that's also something that could really be a question in old time music. Is the best version the oldest version you can find on Slippery Hill, which is a site when you can find like old recordings, or is the best version the one you like, or the one that's the most commonly played and you can play with many people? There's no one answer to that question, but it's interesting to talk about this.
And
also.
How can you add your own interpretation style without losing the genre style? And
yes,
that's complicated.
Yes,
it's a really complicated question.
But we'll talk a little bit more about that later at the end of the stream. Let's end this first part on maybe the two other collectors that you talked a lot in your book, and also in the article. If you look at the second link that is posted, it's an article about Charles Lummis on the magazine. And he's one of the two collectors you talk the most concerning the new frontier, the Far West collecting of songs. There's John Lomax, who's very well known for collecting cowboy songs, and but in English, mostly in English, and Charles Lummis, who collected lots of songs in Spanish language from the part of the Southwest that were quite recently Spanish territory. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about maybe Charles Lummis, which is not as well known as John Lomax, to explain who he was and how he became a collector.
There are some similarities between those two collectors. They were both trying to popularize what they were collecting. They were not academic researchers who were working to study something, answer a question, and also their methods were a bit less strong, maybe,
orthodox.
But they published books and articles, and they really tried to put that out. And so Charles Lummis was a guy from Ohio, actually, he has no roots to ancient Spaniard culture in California before it was part of the US, when it was part of the Spanish Empire. But he traveled from Ohio to Los Angeles. He walked, and he wrote the story of his big tramp across the continent, and published articles who became very popular because it happened. A lot of stuff happened. Was like watching a Western, reading a Western, and when he arrived there, he discovered Pueblo music and the music of the New Mexican peasants, and then the music of what was called the Californios, which was the people who descended from the Spanish who were there before the Mexique was Mexique, but when it was part of the Spanish Empire, and California was part of this empire. And he loved this music. He loved Southwest, also the country, and so his idea was that this is the real American folk music. This is the music of the Californios, because they were there before the the British, and by the way, the French were there before too.
Yes, in your book you studied that subject later, but in your books there's not many mention about French music in the US.
I tried to stay impartial, and so he recorded a lot of very cool songs on the cylinder in 1905. So it was really early. And he also worked with some anthropologists, because he also recorded Native American music. And he was a funny guy. He loved cigars and women too.
Maybe let's end this first part with a song.
Yeah,
if you'd like.
We can do kind of a contest, and between the guys who thought that British song, old Elizabethan ballads were the real American folk music, and Lummis who thought it was the Californios one, and I can sing one of each.
Exactly. Yes, let's try that. She will play now for you one of the old Appalachians ballads.
I'm tuned for the Spanish one.
But first, Lummis.
The Lummis one.
Lummis one. Let's.
Well, it was sung by Manuela Garcia and Rosendo Uruchurtu, and Lummis said it was an old ballad from Spain, but actually there were Mexican people, and other researchers found out that most of the songs actually were Mexican songs from the late 19th centuries. But anyway, and he recorded this song, so I listened to it on a cylinder few years ago on the website, and then the recording disappeared, so I don't know now where you can listen to the song. So.
Here.
Yeah, but
here and now. But yeah,
it's not gonna be as good.
Let's put it. Yeah, this would be nice.
Despierta, blanca paloma. Mira que yo soy constante. Ven al lado de tu armonte, di su amor y disfrutar. Sí, sí, di su amor y disfrutar. Despierta y oye, canta las aves y de mirar los trinos suaves. Despierta y oye, canta las aves y de mirar los trinos suaves. Qué linda sale la luna y nos alumbra los dos. un momento a tu ventana y goza el fresco de la mañana. Sale un momento a tu ventana y goza el fresco de la mañana. Voilà.
Thank
The
you.
Spanish side
Thank you so much.
of Americanness.
You got a heart sent by Léo Divari.
Ah,
Someone
coucou.
chat. Léo, salut
Coucou
Léo.
Léo. T'en avoir marre de m'entendre chanter cette chanson.
And welcome to the new viewers. Coucou Léo, ça va? On a fini de parler de la première partie du... Elle en redemande. Elle est contente.
Et maintenant, je sais que Val, il fait des Twitch World
Je vais
of
balancer
Warcraft,
des trucs.
c'est ça? Je vais aller le troller.
Ah, d'ailleurs, à ce propos, je crois que c'est lui qui nous envoie un coucou.
Ah, coucou.
Salut Val. Nice haircut. Je suppose que c'est pour moi. À moins que tu te sois coupé les cheveux récemment.
Non.
Merci Léo. Effectivement, c'est court. Hein. Ça me fait bizarre, mais ouais, ils sont courts. Et l'orthosphérale joue à World of Warcraft et regarde en même temps. Trop cool.
Trop bien. J'ai un copain qui a fait des émissions Twitch où il joue à un jeu de zombies. Et j'ai regardé 10 épisodes, j'étais dingue. C'était trop cool. Je savais pas que ça existait avant ça.
Mais ouais, mais maintenant Twitch, voilà,
Oui, c'est trop
tout le
cool.
monde va s'y mettre. Hein.
Ouais. Il doit y avoir des youtubeuses beauté aussi qui sont passées sur Twitch, non?
Sûrement.
Faire des-
Il y a, comment elle s'appelle
Ah, t'en connais là?
Je connais, mais ouais, mais la plus connue, là, une nana qui était très connue.
Parce qu'elle joue du
non,
violon
comment elle
aussi.
s'appelle Non. Mais non, mais tous les gens qui étaient sur YouTube il y a 5 ans, il y a 10 ans maintenant,
Ils sont sur Twitch. Ok.
Attends. Tu nous avais dit que tu allais chanter une deuxième chanson,
Ouais.
chanson du répertoire plutôt de Lummis,
Voilà.
en espagnol, et une
oui.
chanson en anglais.
Et une chanson, une vieille ballade anglaise qui a été beaucoup jouée aux États-Unis et qui a eu beaucoup de succès et qui est très connue. Et c'est une murder ballade en plus. J'aime bien les murder ballades. Et là, c'est d'après la version de Dog Bugs. Mais je le joue en clohammer parce que.
A small question about. Oh yes, we should just a question about the way you played that last song.
Mm-hmm.
You used a technique, a right hand technique. You played
I just
very
muted
interesting way.
the fifth
You muted
string
the fifth string
with
and
my
you used
thumb.
up picking
I played like it was a guitar.
like
and
it
I
was a
muted
guitar.
the-
Yes, that
yeah.
kind of things.
Yeah.
It was recorded on the guitar. The
Yeah,
version,
the guitar player. Yeah, it was on the guitar. Mm-mm.
Ok, great. Eh bien, c'est parti pour Dog Bugs.
Ouais. I won't play
which-
all the. I won't sing all the verses because there are a lot.
Which one is it?
Pretty Polly.
Pretty Polly. Great.
Je voudrais des harmonies, Léo. Tu peux chanter avec moi. Tu la connais, toi?
Non. Je vais pas me tenter, je vais pas risquer les harmonies.
I used to be a rambler, I stayed around in town. I used to be a rambler, I stayed around in town. I called it Pretty Polly, Gilda's never been found. Pretty Polly, oh yonder she stands. Pretty Polly, oh yonder she stands. With rings on her fingers and lily white hands. Pretty Polly, come take a walk with me. Pretty Polly, come take a walk with me. When we get married, pleasure to see. You led her over hills and valleys valley so deep. He led her over hills and valleys so deep. Alas, pretty Polly, she began to weep. Oh Willie, I'm afraid of you, eh? Willie, oh Willie, I'm afraid of you, eh? I'm minding to ramble, leave me astray. Pretty Polly, you guessing I'm right. Pretty Polly, you guessing I'm right. I dug on your grave 2/3 of last night. He threw the dirt over her and turned away to go. He threw the dirt over her and turned away to go. And as pretty Polly, she fell asleep.
Thank you.
Elle est morte.
Oui. Murder Ballad. Il y avait un spoiler dans le,
Oui.
dans le genre. Et j'ai réalisé que j'étais à l'écran pendant les chansons et tout. Et du coup, ça fait un peu bizarre parce que je suis.
Ah oui.
Mais je me suis. Je sais pas si certains d'entre vous ont vu les émissions télé de Pete Seegers.
Il fait
vous
ça.
savez des invités.
Ah voilà, il veut se prendre pour Pete Seeger maintenant.
Ouais, et alors lui, on le voit toujours, il est plongé, mais il est dans un rocking chair. Alors tu vois les gens qui sont en train de jouer, il est comme ça, avec un air.
C'est cool.
J'apprécie cette musique et je me suis dit que j'allais.
Bon, il te faut un rocking
Je
chair.
voulais pas te déconcentrer. Mon siège fait. Mon siège se balance.
Bon, bah,
Je peux faire Pete Seeger.
si j'en refais une, tu ferais Pete. Ah, bah, il faudrait que je fasse une chanson de Pete Seeger et tu pourrais faire Pete Seeger et là, ça va faire exploser l'univers parce que ce serait un. Tu sais, quand il y a deux trucs qui doivent pas arriver ensemble, qui arrivent. Je sais plus comment ça-
Paradoxe.
Un paradoxe temporel, voilà.
On va faire ça à la fin de la deuxième partie. On va prendre une petite pause, comme ça on a le temps de fumer
Ouais.
une petite cigarette
Mhm.
et de se resservir à un deuxième
Ouais.
orval éventuellement, si ça
Ouais.
te dit. Et we'll come
Mhm.
back in a few minutes, like 10 minutes maybe.
Mm.
See you very, very, very soon. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
That's one of Marvin Wines' pieces.
What's this?
My dad's. I don't know what the name of it is.
Huh. Your dad played that one, though.
Yeah,
Huh. What was his name?
George L. Carr.
Thanks very much.
That sounds good.
Yes, leather breeches. Let's see.
Now Bill Ham will go there and he just makes the hair raise on me.
That's a good tone, really.
Yeah, it really is.
In London City, where I did dwell, a butcher's boy I loved so well. He courted me my life away, and with me then he would not stay. There is a strange house in this town, where he goes in and he sits right down. He takes another girl on his knee. He tells her things that he won't tell me. I have two dreams, I'll tell you why. Because she has more golden eyes. Her gold will melt and silver will fly. In time but she'll be as poor as I went upstairs to go to bed, and nothing to my mother said. But mother said, you're acting queer. What is the trouble, my daughter dear? Oh, mother dear, you need not know the pain and sorrow, grief and woe. Give me a chair and set me down, with pen and ink to write words down. Oh, dig my grave both wide and deep, place of marbles at my head and feet. Up on my breast a snow-white dove, to prove to the world that I died for love. And when her father first came home, where is my daughter, where has she gone? He went upstairs and opened the door he broke, he found her hanging